to be looking at news sources. Where do we get our stories? Where do we get our story ideas? Lots of them will be ideas that you'll have yourself, will be things that you're passionate about, that you're interested in. But there are also other places to look for stories. And I can't emphasize enough, having a good source of stories, having a good flow of stories is what most editors will want. It's the writing side of things, as I've said to you before, will come with time and with practice. A good editor can rewrite the intro on a story, which is the most important part, within 5 or 10 minutes. But what they want is the context that you have, the story flow that you have, the people that you talk to. And that's why your contact book is so, so important. And it's also really important to let people know that you're doing this course, that you are on the lookout for stories if they have anything to tell you. Now, be aware that you will get your ear bent by all sorts of urban myths of people who went on holiday and ate an egg and came back with tummy cramps and discovered that there were reptiles growing in their stomach. I've heard that story so many times, told to me by so many different people in different situations as an absolute truth. And of course, it's bunkum. But for every 3 of those, you might get a wee nugget of information that gives you a great story. So where does news come from? It comes from incoming information, and that's things like press releases, like I've been giving out to you, and that comes from organisations, and usually they're highlighting an event, something that's happened, a development of some kind, an initiative, or sometimes an appeal. So it would be things like we're used to seeing them coming from the council, and it's about upcoming events, lecture series, museum exhibitions, that sort of thing. Sometimes it's a development in terms of something the council is doing, as we saw that with the recycling of bags there the other week, that initiative that they are have just launched, these new recycling bags. And sometimes it's an appeal, and you expect to start seeing those now, or SPCA asking people not to be letting off fireworks, be mindful of animals, that kind of thing. Then you've got the events that happen every year. Things that you can plan for. So it's things like the Christmas light switch on. We know it's going to happen every year. Santa's going to arrive. In college, we haven't got it this year because of COVID, but there's normally a student OK day, and it's highlighting the good work that is done by our students in very many different areas through volunteering and fundraising and that sort of thing. Children in Need is one that comes up all the time. And also just various other things like Valentine's Day that come up. And if you can think ahead of time and think of something that you can do that is going to be topical for around that time of the year, an editor will love you. If you are going to them the week before and saying, I had a great idea for a feature for Valentine's, you maybe thought about it in June, but you're only doing it now, then they will love that ready-made feature just landing on your doorstep. Diary markings then, and that's things like meetings of Derry City Strabane District Council, Western Trust, District Policing Partnership Board. These are all things that are happening on a regular basis, weekly, monthly, whatever, and they are all form the backbone of your news that you're getting. Now, the problem with that, of course, is that everybody else is getting the same thing. All the other news outlets are getting the same press releases as you. They are getting the same meetings that are happening that they know about, and they obviously know about events that are coming up as well. So while this kind of news is your bread and butter, it's everybody else's bread and butter as well. And the only thing that you can do is try and think about your own context. So for instance, if you have got a story from NSPCA saying no fireworks please, the animals are terrified and awful things can happen to them, blah blah blah, that's fine. But if you can stop and think, I know somebody who had a pet who was so terrified that something bad happened, or I know a pet that was hit by a stray firework or something like that, then that's going to add to the story. But that's, you know, that's hard work. But every time you get a press release in, keep thinking to yourself, Everybody else is getting this too. So what can I add to it? What can I do that moves the story on a wee bit, that makes it more interesting, a better read than just a straightforward press release? Other news outlets can be a good source of stories, radio in particular. Depending on where you're doing your work placement or where you're working, you should always have the local radio station on and just have plugged into one ear, if it's Highland Radio, if it's Radio Foyle, Radio Ulster, wherever you happen to be. Because news stories sometimes crop up in general stories, general programmes I should say, that you get things that come on the Mark Patterson show on Radio Foyle that are not part of mainstream news. They're maybe not reported on the news, sometimes they are, but sometimes a caller into a programme, they don't even know that they've got a good story, but they will talk about that. They will say, oh, such a thing happened, and you need to keep one ear alert to that, because you never know what's going to come up. And the great thing is, the likes of the Mark Patterson show, they tend to put a lot of stuff on their Facebook. And you can also listen again, as you know. So if something comes up and it's interesting, they will put it on Facebook. So you should be monitoring the Facebook pages, the social media for any of those local radio stations in particular. We can also take national stories and give them a local angle. And that's why I asked you to get your Irish news, to have today's Irish news, or yesterday's, Irish news, so that we can do that. Because sometimes stories that have a national angle to them can come to be good local stories. The Irish Times ran a story where they were talking about the conditions, the really poor condition of national schools across Ireland. National schools, same as primary schools, and that children were being taught in really poor conditions, really bad shape, and they named some of the worst areas, and one of them was Donegal and a school near Donegal town. So I asked one of my students who was from Donegal to contact the school and ask them, how bad is it? Because obviously it's in the interests of that school principal to have it highlighted, to have the conditions highlighted, in order to put pressure on the politicians to spend a bit of money and get the facilities upgraded. That's what we thought. That was the angle of the story that we were going for. But when the student phoned the headmaster in the school, he said, I'll tell you what's worse. Our toilet facilities are so bad. We have a child here who's a wheelchair user and who has to go home to use the bathroom because our toilet facilities are inaccessible and totally unsuitable for him. It cannot accommodate his wheelchair. So when he has to go to the toilet, he has to tell the teacher will phone his mum and she will come and take him home and he can use the bathroom and then bring him back to school again. Well, what a powerful story. What an amazing story that turned out to be. And what we did was we wrote up the story and then we turned it round and we contacted the Irish Times and said, do you want to follow up on your story about our crumbling national schools? Here's a fantastic story. And they loved it, and it was printed with the students' byline on it, and they were so happy. I think they even got a few quid for it at that time. Then the story kind of took off, as it sometimes does, because there was a bathroom retailer who saw the story somewhere in Donegal and said, that is heartbreaking, that is disgraceful, that is awful, it shouldn't be happening. I'll tell you what, I will pay to put in a suitable bathroom for this child. I will pay to make sure that he has the same toilet facilities, better actually it was going to be than the other pupils, but that he can go to the toilet, and I will pay all costs and provide everything. And he did. And it was another story. That one didn't make the Irish Times, but it made some of the Donegal papers as well. So it was a good example of a national story that then became a really good local story. And do you probably remember Harold Shipman, Dr. Death? This was a GP who was bumping off elderly patients who absolutely loved him, thought he was wonderful, and nobody got suspicious for quite a long time. And I remember, and this was in Telegraph days, I remember that the journalist who was just at his morning break was reading the story in the Daily Mail, and one of the victims, and it said she had Irish connections. So he went all out on a snoop trail to find out what the connection was, and he discovered that she was originally from somewhere up along the north coast. So that was a good Telegraph story for us. Managed to turn it around, managed to get talking to her daughter. The way that he did it was, it had mentioned that in the area where Harold Shipman was operating, that elderly women in particular would take a taxi to come to his surgery rather than go to a closer surgery where they could get the bus. And there was just that one line in the story, and what he did was he phoned up the local taxi companies and he asked them, did you have a regular fare? Did you take these people? And that's how he got it. And he found a taxi driver who knew the woman who was the victim of Harold Shipman and was able to put the reporter in touch with the woman's daughter. Now, that took a bit of work, but it was great fun and real enjoyment out of it, and great when we landed the story and the daughter was happy to talk about her mum and to talk about her mum's memories of coming from somewhere along the north coast. It might have been Ballycastle, but I'm not 100% sure. And it was a great Telegraph story. Shipman's victim was from Northern Ireland. So, you might not want to spend a huge amount of time on things like that, but you have the good luck now that as you are students, you're not expected to be churning out 10, 12, 15 stories a day on work placement or anywhere else. You have an opportunity to delve a wee bit deeper into some of those stories. So it's just something to think about. Self-generated stories are always good because you know that nobody else is going to have that story. If this is something that comes out of your head, then you know nobody else is going to be thinking about it. Sometimes those self-generated stories, the way that they happen is that you decide to look into something. There's an issue that you have a concern about, and it could be anything from illegal dumping to I don't know, hair coursing, anything like that, something that you care about. And you want to do a little bit of digging around background information, the statistics, the human voice, the expert voice that I've talked to you about before. And then very often when you're doing an interview like that, you will get a news line from it. Somebody will say something, or a bit of information will come to light that has not been seen or heard before, and that can give you a news story as well as your feature. But self-generated stories are good, and they're even better when it's something that you yourself are passionate about, or have information about, or know some people and have the contacts. Monitoring statistics is also a really good thing to do, and I would say get into the habit just in the back of your diary. Say there's a road accident somewhere, but person's not badly injured, nobody killed, but it's a road accident. You might not even do a story on it, probably wouldn't be worth it, but it's worth making a wee note in your diary. There was a road accident on such a date at such a corner or such a stretch of roadway. And then the next time there's an accident on that stretch of road, put it in there as well. And by the time that you've got 3 or 4 accidents along that stretch of road in the space of 6 months or a year, you've got a story. Because that's when it's time to go to the local councillor or the road safety committee and say, should something be done about this road, because there have been 4 accidents over the past, 6 months. It'll take you a minute to note that, and it could generate a decent-ish story for you. And the thing about that is it gets you noticed, it gets the editor noticing you and noticing your talent. And I'm saying about that about, straight news, but it could be anything that you are particularly interested in. I know some of you are very interested in the arts, so maybe if it's an arts venue that's closing down or struggling, you would do the story, but take a note, because if in 6 months you've got 6 arts venues that have closed down, then you've got an even bigger story. You can do, more difficult to do now, you can do your own surveys. This is something that you see a lot in Sunday newspapers. Sunday Times does a lot of it. And this is where you draw up a list of questions and then you survey a certain number of people. And I would always say, try and do like 50 people or 100 people, because it's easier to do the percentages there. So it might be among the student body, if we ever get back to any kind of normality, among the student body, to ask questions like, do you still think a university degree is essential? Do you worry about your student loan? Do you worry, are you confident that you're going to get a job at the end of it? And then you can see that once you've crunched the numbers and had a look at that, a survey can maybe throw up something for you that says that 50% of students still think a university degree is extremely valuable. 20% are positive about their chances of getting a job. That sort of thing. Those are the headlines that you can get from that. And those are self-generated stories. Nobody else is going to have that, and it's still a good read. Investigations, and that's when you get a sniff that something is amiss somewhere. Probably not something that you're going to do here as a student. But it can, if something seems a wee bit odd or off to you, then it can be worth talking to a few people, making a few phone calls and seeing what turns up from that. And the other thing is anniversaries. It's worth making a note in your diary as well. If something happens, then to go back on it. We're very familiar in this part of the world with big announcements about 300 new jobs being created. I never allowed my journalists to say that, because we don't know. That's what they're saying. It's a claim. They're claiming 300 new jobs. But I would always say to them, 300 new jobs in the next 6 months, go back in 6 months, go back in a year. Where the job's created, great, it's another story. Where the job's not created, it's still a story. They have fallen down on what they promised. We also, of course, have anniversaries of things like tragedies that happen, and very often those are marked. Possibly a little less so now, but we used to have things like, Oma, when the Oma bomb happened, and then it was the first anniversary of that. So any kind of tragedies like that, any of those sorts of anniversaries. And that's why as you keep your diary as well and look back, okay, what was happening this time last year? Is there something that I could follow up on? Contacts are really, really important. Your family, your friends, your schools, colleges, community voluntary sporting organisations, they're the ones that will give you stories. Family are notoriously bad for passing on information. So you need to make sure to say to them, tell me things that are going on. Tell me any bits of news that you come across. And make sure that your friends know that you're doing this course as well, because it's very important that they would also be able to give you bits and pieces of information and contacts. When you go into an area, when you get a job, if you get a job, say with a local paper, it's always good to make contacts with the local school or college and tell them that you're available, and you will cover their events. When they have the Christmas fair, you'll cover that. But they will also be a good source of other stories, because everybody who works in that school, the secretary, the caretaker, and all the teachers and all the support staff and everybody else who's there, they all have other lives. They're involved in other things outside of that school environment. But it's handy for you to have them in that cluster that you can get at them all in one go. And they will also be involved in things, they will be involved in a choir or a sports organisation of some kind. You should also look out for the community voluntary organisations in the area on your patch, because they're always looking for help with publicity. They're always trying to fundraise, or they've got events, or they've got campaigns, and they can be a good source of stories as well. Same thing with sports organisations. If you've got a local boxing club and you know some of the people there and you're doing some stories on competitions and things like that, there won't be any of those for a while, but they may turn up a nice story of, you know, the little kid who was bullied at school came along to boxing and gave him the confidence to stand up for himself. Hopefully not to batter people back, but to stand up for himself. So those are the things that you need to start thinking about now. When I'm going to be, and after Halloween, I'm going to be asking you every week, what's your story? What have you got? What are you doing this week? And then we'll talk about how you're going to do a treatment for that story, how you're going to approach it. Key people as well, and those are anyone who comes into contact with the public and has the time to talk to you. People who have that public persona, who are talking to members of the public on a regular basis, and they may have time to talk to you as well. You may have an opportunity to speak to them. So what I would like you to do now is to list half a dozen of those, and I'm going to give you kind of 10, 15 minutes sort of time to do that. Let's say 10 minutes to do that, and then we'll come back. Okay.